the subject of this, as you can see, is AI and the law. From our perspective, I would say AI is probably one of the most significant technological shifts in generations, evolving at an ever-increasing pace and creating both phenomenal opportunity but also significant potential havoc, particularly in the legal field. So with that, I'm going to hand over to this great panel and enjoy learning how to navigate the legal field. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. We're going to just do quick introductions. My name is Justy Nickel. I am the principal attorney at Colorado Lawyer Team, but I don't do business startup law. I am here as the flavor commentary. So I'm going to lead these wonderful ladies through a little bit of a question and answer session about AI. It's a new legal frontier for a Star Trek reference. We'll get to Star Wars later, don't worry. If you guys have questions during the presentation, please raise your hand, shout them out. Like, we'll do our best to repeat the question, but we want this to be interactive. We don't have a lot of slide materials or anything like that. We've got some notes to go over, but it's very informal. So with that, Adrienne.
Good morning. My name is Adrienne Fisher. I'm the founder of Basecamp Legal. I do work with a lot of startups. We help with everything from formation to exit in the venture space, and our practice has been primarily focused on outdoor companies, but we have a geeky side and love technology. So this topic is very interesting to me, and I look forward to chatting more.
Good morning. My name is Purvi Parkey. I am a business attorney as well. Work with businesses on all of their transactional needs. I have my own office here in Denver, and prior to opening up my own firm, I was doing securities and finance work with Sally Mae.
Hello, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Lewis. I also have my own law firm, and I do business law. I focus primarily on IT companies because that's where my background was. So I worked for startups before going to law school, and at the time there was a lot of stuff more with email because email was a new thing, so I got into a lot of the privacy stuff with email in terms of use with websites. So my background is.
My background is solely as a user of AI.
Justy, before you start, we had this, but legal disclaimer. This
Yes.
panel is for informational purposes only, and maybe a little bit of entertainment, and should not be construed as legal advice.
Yeah, my website says you have to pay me and not in peanuts before I represent you. So we'll talk about what money we accept later. Anyway, with that, you guys, some of the things we wanted to talk about was just like the unusual ways that AI and this new technology are already pervasive in our lives. I'm sure all of you have heard of ChatGPT and the shakeup with that, but some of the other ways we're seeing it right now is I use a VoIP service that transcribes all of my calls for my phone calls with my clients. It's super nice. It's a bot. It's not terribly accurate, but it's enough to, prompt my memory when time comes. But how many of you have used the words "Hey Siri" or "Alexa"? Yeah, raise your hand, show of hands. Don't be sitting on your hands. You know you've all done it. That's AI. For those of you who may not be as familiar with it, if you're not using it, somebody next to you is. So with that, some of the ways that you see AI commonly already in your practice.
Well, I'll just say my husband works internationally, and going through DIA, nobody looked at his passport from DIA to Newark to get to Madrid. It's all facial recognition now, which is newly developed, and that's already wreaking havoc. And so in practice, people are using it to generate content for marketing. Jasper is very helpful for our social media providers. That's one of the more common ways I'm seeing it currently.
I'm seeing it actually with law firms. Law firms are using it in drafting, but also just in reviewing a mass amount of documents and doing mass review that way, which is going to lead to a lot of privacy concerns, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but that's where I'm starting to see a lot of AI getting used in a day-to-day use.
So where I'm seeing it a lot is a lot of content generation. So I have a lot of clients that are using it for blog posting, and a lot of them use it for marketing. A lot of them using it, and I use it myself, to draft letters when you're like, I know what I want to say, but it sounds really stupid when I say it. Maybe AI could say it better. And then the other thing I'm seeing a lot of is when you're trying to pick things out from large files, kind of like you see with like Facebook, where it'll kind of say, these people, we tagged all these people, and you're like, how on earth did this even know who this person was in this photo? Because I don't know them. And they just happen to be in the background, and it's like, hey, this is John Doe in the background. And I'm seeing that where you can pick things out in a lot of files that you can't find on your own. So that's when I'm seeing it.
One of the things that we've seen are changes in terms and the terms and conditions of a contract. So when you're starting to subscribe to a new service, stuff like that, we've seen AI start to come in those boilerplate contracts a lot more often. I think, Adrian, you had an example from the New York Times. You want to tell them about that?
Well, the New York Times example is interesting because they actually have updated their terms of use to try to opt out of artificial intelligence combing their, sorry, I'm getting the note that I'm not loud enough. The New York Times has basically said, we don't want AI combing and training LLMs on our copyrighted materials. So in their terms of service, they are actually saying, we're opting out. So if you're going to do that, it's copyrighted material, it's going to be a problem. Now, the question is, will that be enforceable? That's the million-dollar question, right? So more than a million, right?
Those of us who are early millennials, I'm just thinking about Napster now.
Yeah.
How about you, Purvi? Do you have any pros and cons of using AI in the workplace?
Well, I think we've already talked about like using it for content generation, using it for getting that first look at what you want to produce. But as lawyers, I think we'll be the first ones to tell you that the first look, the first draft that AI gives you is not your final draft, and you need attorneys to really come back and take a look at what you're producing. So a lot of folks are using contracts that AI is generating for them, and thinking that that's all that they need to do, that they're done, and that's not the case. There's a lot of we've got recent instances where attorneys are using AI and filing briefs and getting dinged because AI has produced a shadow reference, a false reference. And so, you need the human touch. Attorneys are going to be there to help you with that. And so AI can help you with that first step, but not the final step.
And when you say shadow reference or false reference, you mean a case is cited in the brief by AI that doesn't actually exist?
That's correct. It's a made-up case.
Are there any industries where you're seeing some success with AI? I think one of the things we had talked about when we were prepping for this was maybe healthcare screenings. Do you guys have any input on that?
So I can talk. I can say that there's a lot with AI that's starting to be very well used. And some of it's being really well used with attorneys too. So I know with attorneys, some of the larger law firms are going through and they're doing it more internally as opposed to externally, where they're putting their contracts on their own internal AI so that other attorneys can kind of modify those contracts. Part of the reason why they're doing it internally is because once you start putting things into ChatGPT, it learns from those contracts. So if I put all of my contracts, which I've developed over years, into ChatGPT, they're now all out there for everybody to see. But there are some firms that are starting to do this more internally, where they're hiring AI programmers to do their own contracts internally, and that's a great use of it. So there's something with that.
What about Term Scout? Have you heard of them? I have not heard of it. It's sort of like, yeah.
So Term Scout basically puts contracts, they read contracts and they make it more easily to read for the layperson. So it defines and it regenerates things. And they were one of the early adopters of AI to do that.
So with ChatGPT, they've introduced Enterprise, and Enterprise gives you a siloed bucket. So when you're saying that your contracts are out there for the world to see, then are you not using Enterprise, where Enterprise keeps that in a smaller bucket?
So this would be for people that aren't paying for the exclusive use to use siloed buckets. This is people that are just using the general, hey, I pay my $20 a month usage.
What we see a lot with law firms too is they may have a proprietary paid for service. Are they telling every paralegal and every associate that they have to only use that one, or are they going out and using regular open source API? Once it's on the internet, it is there forever. I don't think anybody still remembers those lessons, but it's absolutely 100% true. So any proprietary stuff that may be in the hands of your employees, your contractors, be very wary of what they're putting online. I think Sarah Silverman has already sued, I don't even know what, for
Copyright infringement.
copyright infringement.
For
Yeah,
training.
so we're seeing it with celebrities right now.
I will say Samsung learned that lesson the hard way. They had employees using artificial intelligence, and that got leaked, obviously, and it was confidential information. So for the smaller folks who aren't necessarily using it at the enterprise level, particularly startups, it can be, I work with companies all the time that are on the forefront of technology and developing new ideas. So it's very, very important to know that, like Jesse says, once it's on the internet, it's out there.
I would also want to add that this kind of leads to this idea that as business owners, we need to be very mindful of putting in our internal policies. What is it you want your employees to do with AI and confidential information? If you don't want them to do anything, you need to make that very clear, because ChatGPT it's very accessible, right? It's free. It can be free. If you want limited use, you need to make that very clear. Similarly, you also need to make sure that your contractors, your vendors, have their policies in place, and that you know what they're doing with your information, because that's really, that's really important. Once it leaves your hands, those vendors can do whatever they want with that information, and what kind of, you need to be mindful in your agreements with those vendors. What's your risk? Who's going to take that risk? Who's taking that liability if information gets used inappropriately?
I'll just add to, Zoom got in trouble very loudly, I would say, because they changed their terms of service, saying, by the way, we're just kind of going to creep in on your meetings and use that to train our LLM.
You say train our LLM, what do you mean?
Large language model. So, to train their own internal AI capabilities. And of course, when they made that change, they backtracked and they're like, just kidding, we're not actually going to, listen in on your meetings, and it's private. And, so this is an example of maybe a company not totally thinking through the public ramifications of privacy issues.
One of the things that we did was, I have a small law firm, but it's not solo. I actually had ChatGPT draft my AI policy for the small firm. It totally works. And then I made my employees sign off on it. We also got a really robust cyber insurance policy, not gonna lie. That's not a bad idea in this day and age. And we have very carefully drafted indemnity clauses. So one of the funny stories, I think, was Elizabeth with the soccer story. You wanna share that one?
Yeah, so there's a lot of examples of AI gone wrong. So it's one of those things where you really have to be cautious when you're using AI, because you never know. One of my kids is a huge soccer fan. And during COVID, they didn't want to have people doing live TV shots of soccer. And I think if you were a soccer fan, you saw empty stadiums where they were playing soccer. Well, they used AI to kind of track, they were going to use, instead of a cameraman, they used AI. Well, the AI, for one of the poor people in the field, he was bald. So instead of tracking the soccer ball, it tracked his head. So this game, and it was in Scotland, and I think you can find it on YouTube. Instead of going soccer ball, soccer player, it was bald head, bald head, bald head. So there's a lot of examples. I mean, that one happens to be really funny. I know we all have heard the different things with AI that's gone wrong that haven't been so funny, like cars hitting people. Or all of a sudden you hear about things, I think it was Alexa, where you hear they recorded a lot of conversations and people ended up in therapy because they were forced to listen to domestic violence over and over that was being recorded. So there's a lot of areas where AI can go wrong. So it's one of those things that when you're going to be using AI in your business, you want to make sure that somebody's there to kind of see what the AI is doing so that you don't submit a case, you don't put a brief into the court that has made up cases in it. And then when you go to try to find out, hey, I'm going to go look up these made up cases, it makes up cases to back up the made up cases, which is actually what happened.
It doubles down.
Yeah, so it kind of said, here's a fake brief, and then here's fake cases to back up the fake brief. And, so it's one of those things where you really have to make sure when you're using AI in your business, it's great, but you have to go through and double check that it's doing it correctly.
And I mean, it's pulling things from the internet, right? So, of course, everything on the internet is true. Yeah, what's up here?
I just want to clarify a point you made on large language models and ChatGPT. The language model has to be created with the corpus of data to produce that model. So when you're actually prompting the system, it's not ingesting your information and learning from it and then providing you prompts. So just to make that clear. So when you're putting a prompt and you're uploading a PDF, now does OpenAI have that data? And is it on record with them? Absolutely. But it's not informing the AI to be used in somebody else's prompt.
No, that's definitely the case. But there is generative AI out there, and it's taking it. There are instances of AI where it is taking the what you're inputting.
So there's other generative AI models.
Correct. Just not ChatGPT. I mean, we've got a wide range here. And so you need to be very careful. You need to know, you need to look at those terms and conditions. Instead of just clicking that box when it says I accept, you need to know what they're doing with your information because it very well could be being used to inform others. Yeah.
In the green right here.
So one of the things, so Elizabeth, you mentioned that we're able to do it. Some startups that are using it to create blogs. Now, in the good old days, you could write a blog and say, well, I got it from this website, I retrieved it as of this date, and this is what it said, and essentially execute those ideas. But I've noticed with ChatGPT, every time you go to it, it's something different. So are there best practices for saying, well, I got this from ChatGPT or Claude as of a certain date, but no one can go back and double check that because it's going to be different when they query.
I mean, that's another great con. Does anybody have any?
I will just say, the FTC published some interim guidelines on using AI, and I encourage all small business owners to go review those policies because we don't have any regulation at the moment. But Lena Khan is definitely on, I would say, more on the technology forefront of regulation than our previous FTC chairs. So that would be a good starting point. They are really focusing on hopefully including transparency. So what I've even started doing is when I use ChatGPT, because I use it as well to generate some LinkedIn posts, I say created with the help of ChatGPT. And that transparency is just a good practice.
Disclaimers. Big fan of disclaimers. Legal panel here. In the back. You were standing up. I got you. Don't worry.
Oh, I don't know. I was going to say, what that gentleman was saying in the blue shirt, totally correct. That it doesn't, take your code in and then, but as you guys were saying, give it a year. We're going to get ChatGPT 5. They can legally do whatever. So, yeah, anyway.
Well,
Yeah, it's constantly evolving. So
I just also want to say that the Copyright Office, we touched on that as well a little bit, but you can't get work, not necessarily blog posts, but if you're writing material out there, you're not going to get a copyright if it's used only with AI. You actually, when you're applying for copyright protection, you need to show, state that it was created with AI, or that there's a component of it, but also show human authorship. If you can't show human authorship, you're not going to get it. And so there are, we're starting to see agencies come through and really get into it.
And I was going to say, I think it depends on what you mean by attribute to somebody. Because if you take somebody's whole blog post, and you take the whole blog post and you post it on your site, and you say, hey, this is where I got it from, that's just setting you up for somebody to say, hey, here's the lawsuit for copyright infringement. That's not really attribution. But if it's something where you say, I got some of these ideas, you take a sentence here and there, it's a little bit different. And I think with ChatGPT, it's the same thing to say, helped, created with the help, but you go through and you modify it. That's a lot different than just taking ChatGPT and what it spits out, pasting it onto your site.
in the green there.
So, in the example of the soccer ball and the bald head, and this being Startup Week and us being entrepreneurs who maybe some of us are out developing AI platforms, doesn't that have more to do with the product roadmap and testing and validation before you go to market? It seems like that platform wasn't ready to go to market, and that was, people being compelled to get a product out to market too soon before fully testing, and then the customer buying into a product that wasn't fully vetted. That seems like a product that was just launched too soon.
I think that's a very valid point, and I think just on that forefront, we have a lot of companies that want to be first to market in the artificial intelligence space, and law is typically 2 to 3 years behind in regulation, and when we're looking to Congress for those regulations, the average congressperson age, I think, is over 60. They're in learning sessions.
Over 70?
Over 70, yeah. So they're in learning sessions about technology that they don't necessarily understand. And I could get into a whole philosophical question. I don't want to turn this political, but I think that this is, something to be really thoughtful about when we're trying to get products into the market, particularly with such a technology that has the capacity to basically revolutionize our generation.
And this kind of goes back to what I was saying before. As a user of AI, you need to know that product may not be ready, because as a purchaser, you may not know that. And so when you're setting up that purchase agreement or that licensing agreement, it's really about, if there's a system failure because of the AI, is the vendor going to take that risk? In this situation, it's humorous that, it followed the bald head, but if it actually caused business damages, who's going to be responsible for that? Is it the vendor who took it to market too soon? They thought it was ready, right?
Or it's even like with the attorney example with the brief. If you are the client whose attorney used AI to do the brief, and I'm sure this attorney didn't think that it was going to come up with false cases. I mean, that wasn't on the guy's mind because now he's gotten sanctioned and all kinds of other things. But it's one of those things you need to be, as a consumer, asking all of the people that you're working with, what are you doing with AI? Are you using, as attorneys, are you using AI to generate your briefs? Are you using AI to do your legal research? Because I know I was just curious because I was using ChatGPT to see where is the state of the law. Like if I ask it a question, where will it come up? And I asked about the new family program in Colorado, which is the family medical leave program for Colorado. And I was like, can you tell me about family medical leave in Colorado? And it was like, well, Colorado follows federal law. There is no state family program. And I'm like, no, there actually is. And then I had to kind of like, the prompts say, okay, well, can you go to this website and look at this text and then summarize it? Can you do this? Can you do this? But if you don't know that it's further behind and you're hiring somebody who doesn't know it's further behind, then you get into some problems.
I'd like to add to the vendor liability piece. So currently, under Section 230, technology providers are not liable for third-party generated content or users. Now, the question is, I've heard everything from, are we going to nationalize and take over these platforms and regulate it that way? Is that standard going to continue to hold up? So if you are creating artificial intelligence platforms, I think one of the things you have to think about is the liability component and whether that protection will be there in the future.
I think, yeah, my eyebrows just went up a little bit when I'm thinking about a 78-year-old congressman learning in remedial how to Facebook classes, setting up safety measures for this stuff. In the blue back there.
Okay, first, as a nearly 60-year-old, don't be Asian. Secondly...
It's the millennial in me.
Secondly, when you said you would need to show human authorship to be able to get copyright, how would you show human authorship?
Not me, not it.
So the Copyright Office is actually selecting comment for policy. Currently, they've extended that deadline through October, I believe. It's not currently, they don't have regulation. So usually the way that develops is through the court system. So the question is, how much human authorship qualifies for a copyright? And that's
75%? 85%?
And that's 10, 20, you know,
And it may be, I'll know it when I see it. So
Ooh, I
that
love
might
that
be
standard.
the next, you know, it might just be, I'll know it when I see it, because that's the thing, is that law is always years behind. You know, I know when I worked in email marketing, coming up with email marketing policies, it was like, well, they're already spamming everybody. And that's when the Can Spam Act came out. I mean, it's always years behind. So.
And I definitely remember, I don't remember this law, but when we learned in law school about pornography and what's offensive language, right? You know it when you see it, right? Greenback.
So recently, there was a case that went, I think it was in the lower high court.
Court of Appeals.
With Midjourney, and the finding and the kind of the debatable wording, which does kind of leave room to move it up in the court system, was human input. And that was very loosely defined, which I think the judge did on purpose to kind of kick it upstream.
Never kick the can. Never say it depends.
But Midjourney, the way that it works, it doesn't ask you a series of questions. So for you guys who don't know, I'm sure you might know, Midjourney creates art. If I were to go hire commission an artist, I wouldn't give them one sentence. Make me a cityscape at night. That's just a roll of the dice. I'd say that the problem is the platform. The platform's not asking the questions that an artist might ask in order to add so much input that it's actually creating, you're uploading samples and you're giving it good input, and you're getting iterations and then finalizing a finished product. I'd say that it was the platform making it susceptible to lawsuit, but not necessarily AI being vilified. What thoughts on that?
Well, maybe, I mean, I know with that platform, my son used it to create Lionel Messi on a great shark, riding off into the sunset, carrying the Lombardi trophy with like 15 other things. And so it was this masterpiece that he really wants to have printed and put on his wall now. So, I mean, is that art or not? I mean, there was a lot of input into this. I mean,
Is Lionel Messi going to sue your son?
well, that's another question. We'll leave that aside because it was the program that created it, not him.
Vilify
So,
AI.
yeah, so, I mean, but the thing is that, you know, if a 13-year-old just starts spitting words into a program, is that art or not? Because, and I think it's a question that's not going to be able to be answered for years probably, because how much input do you, I mean, is it art if somebody tells you what they want drawn? Well, is the artist doing it, or is it the person telling you what they wanted done? So it's a big question that's going to have to be answered.
To that end, if somebody who is a legal assistant in my office puts in a query to ChatGPT, pretend you're a seasoned attorney, XYZ, give advice about this, blah, 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 is that the unauthorized practice of law? And if so, is it my assistant, who I failed to supervise, or is it the AI? AI.
Where does the unauthorized practice of law come in? Does it come in when you're counseling, or does it come in when you're in the legal system in front of judges and practicing as an
Depends on what they do with that information. To your point. Good job. Yep. Way to ruin my hypothetical. God. All right, Adrian, what do you got? Come at me, bro.
I think another question. That's fine.
Yeah. Right here in the blue.
Yeah, so what do you think the impact on the actual practice of law will be in the next 5 to 10 years? Or, you know, how is law going to change?
They're taking all my talking points. We're already there. I literally had prompts written down, and now we have how lawyers are going to be obsolete. Or not. I mean, I know my thoughts, but you guys tell me.
So Goldman Sachs put out that analysis. 44% of legal work, they estimate, will be augmented by AI. Does that mean that I will have a job? I mean, when I look at my practice, there's the legal side of it, there's the emotional component that people want to connect with a human, particularly when they're making a huge decision for their business. And will I use AI to augment my practice? 100%. I mean, there are tasks that I think, you know, should be augmented, and it may change the way we bill. And I think the way forward is there will be lawyers who use AI, and there will be lawyers who are choosing not to use AI. And those will be questions. There is currently a test out for responding to trademark office actions. They're talking likelihood of confusion and genericness responses. These are typically briefs that take half a day to write. Could that be written in 2 minutes? And what's the value? What value add do I have in reviewing those briefs and making that argument that a client should get that trademark or that copyright? And also, just to finish that thought, on the legal side, augmenting our practices is something that we should really consider, and we do have to stay up to date with the bar rules. Per the bar rules, we should be learning this technology. So I think it behooves us to learn to work with it. And in the meantime, I think it's going to generate a ton of legal work, because sometimes our work is corporate janitor cleanup. And I think in the wake of introducing this technology, we're going to have more work than we know what to do with.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, we are going to start seeing contracts that are not correct because, we're called counselors for a reason. It doesn't have that human component, as Adrian was saying. So we are going to have to clean that up and actually say, well, this contract doesn't apply to your business, or because we know a little bit more about you and your business than the AI does, and that they probably won't ever know. The AI won't know that human component to it.
In my practice, I do mostly criminal defense and family law. So it's a little bit different, right? Like, I'm not advising business to business, I'm business to consumer. My consumers are already out there Googling this shit. So for me, it's a little bit of dealing with the misinformation, doing the quality control. The way I look at it a little bit is I'm using it. If I'm not using it, my competitors are. As solo and small firm attorneys, we have to have a little bit of an advantage when it comes to being efficient. We bill less. We are more economical for a lot of our clients. We can't compete with the big firms, except for by using technology. We are early adopters because it's easier for us to pivot. But also, lawyers have always been a sponge. We take information. We read constantly. We research. That's what you hire an attorney for. And then the end product is we take all of that and we filter it through our experience. Our quality control mechanisms are internal. Is this going to be any different? No, it's just another source of information. That's my opinion.
I will say 15 years ago, they said LegalZoom was going to kill the legal industry. That's what everybody said. LegalZoom actually ended up, for a lot of attorneys, being really good, because people would come in with a contract from LegalZoom, and it was like, okay, you paid $500 for this contract. Now it's going to take me $20,000 to fix what you did with this contract. So it really didn't hurt the legal industry. And I think there's going to be a huge thing where AI is great, and helping you draft your will or draft your powers of attorneys or draft your contracts is great. But it's not going to be, the computer's not going to sit there and say, are you really sure that's who you want your kids to go to if you die? Are you really sure that that's what you want done with your last remains? Are you sure that's what you want done with your business? I mean, yes, it can generate the contract, but it can't sit there and tell you, well, have you thought about what happens if this? What about this? What about this? It's that experience. It's kind of like, if I go to the doctor, yes, I want a really good doctor, and yes, AI would be great. I can go Google the symptoms and say, well, you know what? I think I have some kind of terrible testicular cancer. Well, that's because Google told me. There is no way I have testicular cancer. I mean, it's just not humanly possible. That's why I go see a doctor. And it's the same thing with AI. It's going to be great to do a lot of things. There's going to be a lot of cleanup, but there's going to be a lot of things it's not going to be able to do that you're going to want that face-to-face interaction for all industries.
I mean, attorneys are basically experts, right? You pay us for our expertise. The difference between us and ChatGPT is the expertise. What I think we end up happening is, I'm a big fan of delegation. And the first question that I ask is my legal brain necessary for this task? If the answer to that is no, is this the highest and best use of my time? If the answer to that is no, I'm delegating that. That shouldn't be me. So why wouldn't it be ChatGPT, a legal assistant, a third-year law student, whatever the proper place should be? It's always going to be expertise and the highest and best use of your time.
So we're not at Skynet levels yet.
Not yet. It's getting scary though. Any other? Yeah, in the back there.
If a corporation were to use ChatGPT to write a marketing advertisement, would it, and the marketing advertisement came out as false, would it be able to sue the corporation?
Yeah, the public for like false advertising? Yes.
I mean, whoever is the one that puts it out into the public is the one that's going to be blamed.
It's what you do
Is,
with the information.
You know, whether you hire a marketing company and they give you bad stuff, if it's a marketing company, then luckily you can go back on the marketing company and say, look, your marketing materials were really bad. If it's ChatGPT, good luck suing ChatGPT. I mean, that's the thing but it's based on who's the one that actually put it out into the public.
I'm curious what kind of insurance marketing companies have. I think my next venture is going to be the insurance industry. This is crazy. Yeah, sorry, you have a follow-up on that?
Kind of a joking follow-up. How much Chinese takeout do you guys order, like in the movies?
None.
0.
I think several of us are allergic. Yeah, over here.
And this is just my ignorance when it comes to this. There's a lot of talk about how you can use AI to create images, which it's then there's the legality of whether or not you can. But it seems like the legality of it is not necessarily in the AI's creation of it, but it has to do with your distribution of it, your sharing it, right? Like your son could easily have made that same image in Photoshop, and it would be totally legal. He could get it printed and put up on his wall, and as long as he's not selling it to anyone, then there's no, as far as I understand, there's no legal problem with using it for anything that you are doing. The problem is where and how you're going to distribute it.
I think there's some copyright law question in there about personal or educational use.
Yeah, commercialization is huge. So I don't know if any of you heard there was a TikTok took off with the Drake and Weeknd song and the attribution, and the CEO of the Grammys had to come out and say it's ineligible for a Grammy. So the question, it starts to bleed into trademark law and public likeness laws as well, because you have Drake, who's a public figure and makes money off of his music, right? And so if somebody is commercializing that song and selling and making money off of it, it's taking away from his ability to earn a living and profiting off of that. And what if the song is terrible and Drake gets this reputation that he's no longer a great musician because the song is, is crap?
Didn't Bill Murray get a cease and desist letter from somebody that he was using music from?
Yes.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Look up the Bill Murray cease and desist letter. Anytime you're Googling it, it's hilarious.
So to kind of follow up what he was saying, marketing companies have professional general liability insurance.
Increase that policy limit right now.
I have. Government contract, so it's got to be over $1 million, 100%. So that answers that. One of the questions I had to kind of tag off that was, as a marketing company, what I did find out, if you use anything from Midjourney, DALL-E, which is the OpenAI, they own the content as well as you do when you create it. And they have a clause in there that if you make money on that, they have the right to go after and work some sort of deal, but it's very gray area as to how much you got to pay them, all your proceeds, 8%, 20%. So one of my questions is, as a marketing company, we leverage AI along with human creativity to create good content based on what the client wants. But given all this gray area and ambiguity in the regulations, what are some best practices in terms of not knowing how big the content will become, or not knowing what, where it will go? How do we protect ourselves as a company to not veer in the way of like copyright infringement or trademark IP infringement, anything like that?
So I would say you need to make sure you disclose to your clients that you're using AI and that you're using these services that may come back to them and say, we need a cut of the profits here. So you need to make sure you're telling your clients that, because if you don't, your clients are going to come back to you and say, we didn't know, you didn't tell us, you're responsible for that amount.
Some lawyer's going to make a lot of money making precedent on this stuff, and I am not in the right area of law. Yeah, in the stripes.
So going back to the whole do no harm thing, so I work with electronic health record information, which is company that's out and I was using this R package, and I found out that R package is open source, that allows them, people to access protected personal health information, and I don't even think the company even knows that. So how do we protect ourselves in those instances where we're trying to use these open source tools beyond ChatGPT without, like, are they liable for that if there is a breach?
Lawyer's favorite word.
Depends.
It depends.
Depends,
Exactly.
yeah.
It's like we're all like, it depends.
To my knowledge, nobody has been sued yet for that kind of distribution of protected health information or confidential information. But anything that you put in that open source database, right, like protected health information, for lawyers, it's, do we put our client's name in when we're drafting that letter? Draft a letter to client Jane Smith about X, Y, and Z. No, do not do that. Yeah, like just don't, because you can't control it in terms of protecting yourself.
Privacy laws still apply. So if you're dealing with private information, then make sure it's not going into it.
I think the big thing is reading the terms of use before you use something. I mean, I will say, if a lot of terms of use, I will say, I'm an attorney. I don't read all of them.
Never.
Because if I'm using it for something that really doesn't matter, I'm probably not going to read the terms of use to order my younger son's talkie slippers. I'm just not, because I don't really care. But if I'm putting anything client-based into something, I read the terms of use. If I'm going to be using a billing program, if I'm going to be using a CRM, if I'm going to be using ChatGPT, I read the terms of use to know what's being put up there. And the bigger thing is, if there's anything that I really, 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 really want to be confidential, I don't put it anywhere. It's something that I'll have a face-to-face conversation with my client where there's no Alexa, there's no, looking at your phone, making sure Siri's not on, and say, you know what, and I know with my stuff, most of my client stuff is not super, super, super confidential. But, there are some areas, I'm sure, like with criminal law, you get some areas where you start talking about things you just don't want out there, or with medical. So you just have to be really cautious where you're putting things.
And I put it in my engagement letters as well. I am using these technologies. I list them. If you have a problem with that as a client, you need to let me know and opt out right now in writing. You know how many times in 15 years I've ever gotten one of those opt-outs? 0. Nobody reads the second page of my engagement letter.
And I do the same thing. I have a list of all the stuff I'm using. And I will say, I have had 2 people in the last 15 years even comment on my engagement agreement. So, but that's probably, I will say, how many people actually read all the stuff when they go to the doctor's office and you get 50 forms and you fill them all out? Nobody ever reads them.
In the white, actually.
Yeah. It sounds like there are a lot of existing practice areas where it presents a pretty large risk to use these large language models or computer vision models. Are there existing areas of practice or specific use cases you are really excited for AI to kind of take over?
I absolutely love the content marketing.
Content marketing and some of the more basic client drafting, in terms of letters that don't necessarily need even an admin assistant to go out, automating that, obviously without client information that gets populated later. The delegation is just huge.
In general, I'm excited to see how AI is going to shift not just the legal industry, but every industry out there. I think every single industry is impacted, and it's only forcing us as humans to become more creative and more provide more value to our own clients and customers. And so I think that's the excitement that I have, is to see how we are going to become creative.
And I will say, I think it's exciting because I use it to go and find other people's contracts, because I find a lot of value in, I have contracts and I think they're really good, but I always like going and reading other people's contracts because there's always that one thing they dealt with that I haven't. So I actually really like it for people that have put their contracts up there and maybe not thought about, hey, I'm putting my contract up there, because I can go and look at it. And when you Google contracts, it's the same thing as using Google just to say, hey, I'd really like to see what's in this buy-sell agreement. And you go and you get 30 different copies. It just makes it a lot easier to go through those 30 copies.
And I will say one additional remark too is I am excited to see about legal research. It's going to get to a point where they do have those cases pinned down. It's going to cut back our research time and research costs. Those of us who are in litigation, when we are in court and I'm like, I know I have a case out there that says this, find it for me. I can ask ChatGPT to do that right from the courtroom rather than having to call back to my office. And with Westlaw recently acquiring Case Text and their Cora AI, I'm excited to see what a big company like Westlaw can really do with AI. So, sorry, we've got one more back here in the green. He's been patient.
So, Facebook, it turned out that their boosted posts the numbers were inflated, and there was a class action lawsuit, and they ended up having to put together a fund to pay back for the damages.
I think I got a penny.
So in that case, I had a media broadcasting company, and I took on advertising dollars with part of those funds allocated to boost the videos that were produced on Facebook. Now, Lamps Plus hasn't come back to me, and Lowe's and Home Depot and Granger haven't come back to me saying, hey, do we get a piece of that back? But it does raise the question, I'm on any AI platform, and right now we're kind of in this gray area, but later on, if we've made money off of it, and we've allocated part of budgets passed on to the client, will we owe any of that back, and how's that kind of trickle downstream?
I highly recommend having a seasoned attorney draft your contracts.
But I mean, just in general, for all of us who are, no?
Right now, you're the product. And we as consumers lack the leverage to negotiate with AI companies. So I think we just have to keep that in mind, that right now we are the product that people are leveraging to make money by training these LLMs. Yeah.
But I think your question was more, if you get money back from a lawsuit, do you have to give it back to your clients because they paid you? Yeah. And that'll go back to what your contract says.
It depends.
I mean, if you end up with $10,000
No
from
refunds.
Facebook, you're a marketing company, you took money from all your clients to do Facebook ads because it was under your account, you end up with $5,000, $10,000 back from Facebook. Whether or not you have to divvy that up to each individual person, you have to say, okay, well, this person was 1/10 of my budget, this person was 1/8 of my budget, and you have to give it back to them. It's all going to go back to your contract.
And that's giving me a brain aneurysm right now. My undergrad's in accounting, and I am already cringing. How many of you have an outsourced accounting department that you work with regularly? Yep. So that might be something else you could do to protect yourself. Really get your accountant involved early on. Get your lawyers involved early on. Let them know you're using these technologies. You're making money from these technologies, and then also what they recommend. So seek other professional advice as well, and therapy.
Just an add-on to that, so we built out our privacy policy.
Did you use ChatGPT to do it?
I used a legal representative, doing better than me. But all these add-ons and everything to it, is that going to be different than, say, a privacy policy that you have to put as a disclaimer or add on to your website? Is this going to be something more in-depth that has to have more research into, or is this going to be about the same, or do we not know?
We don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we don't know yet what that looks like, because we don't, so currently the only regulations federally we have is President Biden had a bunch of tech companies to the White House, and they all voluntarily agreed to police themselves. So that's
just like lawyers.
Yeah, that's currently where we are in terms of regulations. Currently we have some state laws in effect, but it's a patchwork, and so.
Do you think it's going to come out of Europe?
Yeah, so here's two things. One, I would say to Jesse's question, yes. I think Europe is going to be where we need to be looking. So earlier this year, they kind of agreed to a framework for AI laws that they're going to put into place, but they are looking at a comprehensive AI law that hopefully by the end of this year or early into next year, we're going to see some more definitive words from them, for lack of a better way of saying it. But I think what they're looking at is the risk level. They're looking at, is the AI going to be unacceptable risk, where it's actually doing a cognitive change, or is it low-level risk? And based on that, they're deciding what the rules are going to be around that. So that, just like the GDPR, we're going to look to the EU, and it's going to ripple down to us. I will say in Colorado, we also need to be mindful with the new privacy laws that just came into place. Consumers do have the right to opt out for their information to be used for automated decisions. And so that may actually show up in your privacy policy on your website or in your materials. And so we definitely need to be mindful of that.
I'm going to be updating my privacy policy on my website after today. We have time, I think, for one more question in the white.
Yeah, lottery winner.
You got it.
It's more of an observation, so I don't know if that counts, but in the area of intellectual property, which is where I tend to spend most of my time, the interesting thing is that years ago, YouTube chose to just allow the Wild West. And especially for video content, that's kind of, people don't necessarily point to that, but that is almost considered allowed at this point in navigating those rights.
It's a precedent.
Yeah, and it's created an interesting dynamic. I think my view of what I've heard, both comments but also with the panel, it used to be buyer beware. I think it's now buyer and seller beware. And then secondly, monetization. At the end of the day, monetization is going to be the thing that gets the most attention, obviously. And there are other examples of that. But anytime you can draw something back to monetization or the potential monetization that may have been lost as a result of damage from an AI perspective, I think the thing that what we're seeing in China, there's a good reason why it started in China, so keep that in mind. But China has pioneered and to a degree perfected synthetic media, where they are stitching together an entire newscast that is completely done through AI. It doesn't even feature a talking head, it has a synthetic voice. So while some people think that's cool and other people think that's scary, and again, there's a reason why it started in China, you wouldn't see this start in the West, but we are going to start seeing areas, especially around YouTube, so I go back to that to say you are going to find in the near future bots that have been trained to scrub places like YouTube, handshake with that content, so it is going to have to be some technology on both sides to determine the rights to that IP and if there are limitations to the use case, and then we'll then record that information and provide a compensation model to the owner of that IP, at a separate time, whether it be quarterly or monthly on a royalty basis. This is all coming. So navigating this now and starting to wrap your head around it, it isn't just obviously in video and IP, but it is something that is going to permeate the rest of society.
Yeah, your point about monetization, I think, is well made. You should be up here, okay. But well said, sir. I think we would all agree with that. Like the next steps from here, we're at the beginning, and there's not an end in sight. So trying to figure out how you can use it, how you can protect yourself, you got to do the best you can in what is considered the Wild West of technology right now. With that, I think, is that time pretty close? We got 5 minutes, so we'll just keep going for a little bit here. I was ending on time. I think they were. Yes, we've got stripes right here.
I just want to expand on what you said about the European regulations. So how is that, what's going to follow from that? Are we all trying to, because for these global outreach organizations, are we all going to cower to what they decide, or like how does this work? Is it only if I'm in Europe physically, or?
So if you
Or
have
is it your VPN in Europe?
Yeah, exactly. If you have any touch points with the EU, which I'm sure you do, even though you may not even know it, yeah, it may apply. We don't know yet because we haven't seen it come through, but similar to the GDPR with its privacy policies and opt-outs, I think it's fair to assume that it's going to apply to us in some form or fashion.
In the back.
Yeah. All right, I believe you what you just said, but I don't understand it yet. I'm still wrapping my head around it. What if I am like, okay, I'm a little company, I don't want to deal with the EU. No one in the EU is allowed to use this. I'm looking at the IPs. If you're in the EU, you can't use my app. What if they use a VPN and use my app? Then they're lying to me, and it's their fault, right? Like.
Well, and that's actually that happens a lot, because I know when I was in Europe a couple of years ago, they actually had where I was trying to get to a couple of sites in the US, and if I was on a VPN, I could do it. If I was in Europe, it would actually say, we do not accept any traffic outside of the United States. And that's probably going to happen where you're going to have some places, kind of like you hear with other places with their media. you might get media sources of different types. You're going to have AI of different types, and the AI that you can get here may end up being different than the AI you can get in the EU versus the AI you can get in China. So it's just going to be one of those things where if you're a developer, you're going to have to know you're developing to multiple different crowds. If you're somebody that just wants to be based in the US, you're going to have to put up firewalls and other things to make sure that you're not going outside of the US to the best of your ability.
I mean, we've already seen it with TikTok, right? Like, Chinese TikTok is totally different than the US TikTok. And there was an article recently about how it's been developed differently for Western civilization. And yeah, TikTok's already listened to me enough that I turned it off because can't handle it.
I think it's important to understand that this is a global issue and that the U.S. does have an opportunity to be a leader in the space if they choose to step up and do different regulations. So whether or not we follow Europe is going to come down to what happens on the regulatory side and Congress, which, you know, who knows? But just food for thought.
It's not necessarily a race, but it's iterate, iterate, iterate. It's never going to end. It's going to be evolving. Yeah.
Is there precedent of the United States following federal legislation from Europe ever? Like in terms of, like GDPR, right? It's been out for a long time. And we're not going to a national GDPR. It's being implemented state by state. So do you guys foresee like the same kind of battle? Is that it's going to have to get to 35 states before it bubbles up to the Congress and Senate?
Probably. You know, we haven't been the we haven't led the way in lots of areas, and so I mean, what we are seeing is you know, we have state level policies coming out. We have state level cases coming out that are starting to show how we're supposed to use AI and in a lot of different ways. I don't think we're going to be the leaders here. I think we're too late. Quite frankly, I think
the leaders?
You know, I think the EU has already they've been working on this for several years now. We haven't.
We're the innovators, and then they tell us what to do.
Don't get me started on state rights politics. Yeah, right here.
I've been looking at some of these contract tools that help you draft contracts with the law, like Ironclad, Scout is one that I've looked at. Have you guys looked at those tools, and are any of those particularly interesting to you?
When using contract tools, it's all about implementation. I have looked at Ironclad and FileVine and Term Scout. I have not personally implemented any of those tools for drafting just yet. FileVine was interesting. I like the idea. They're just not where I want them to be yet. I think more innovation is coming, so I'm staying tuned.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where we're at too. We're doing more of our internal wiki kind of thing, doing more of our template drafting from our motions bank using LawYaw, but not AI. Yeah.
Earlier, one of the audience members mentioned that you can add the same prompt twice and get a totally different response. If you actually go into the API embeddings, there's essentially a setting called temperature that sets the volatility in the responses, and so you can lower that to get more standardized responses. That is a level of technical expertise that oftentimes law firms might not have right now when it comes to figuring out how they're going to utilize AI. What resources do you think law firms really need to start getting now to make sure that they're able to use this?
That information would be so helpful. None of us knew that.
I will say, I mean, I know with law firms, many times lawyers are on the very far end of technology. And it's not just getting to the point of it's even getting comfortable with AI. It's going to take years. I mean, it's just something where I know there's a lot of law firms that, you know, even I think 10 or 15 years ago, there was questions, can we really use email? I mean, can we use
do a paperless
online,
office?
You know, can we do things like put files on Dropbox? And, you know, there was a whole question about terms of use for that. I mean, all of the stuff, I mean, you're going to have, luckily, a lot of the newer attorneys, I mean, grew up, it's something that's going to be a generational thing, I think, to get that implemented, and it's going to be, the tools are going to be developed in the future.
All right. Well, thank you guys for being such a great audience.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciated
Thank you.
the interaction.